While she lay in a hospital bed, her son listed her car for sale. Margaret Hale, a widowed nurse and lifelong saver, said nothing. By the time she walked out, the real sale was already in motion. His house, his future, gone with one signature. She'd spent years as his safety net. Now, she was the one cutting the rope. And when he came looking for his keys, the lock would greet him with a stranger's name. "We're about to begin. But if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe." The beeping was the only thing that kept time honest. Slow, metronomic, a heartbeat outside her body saying, "You're still here." Ruth lay propped against two stiff pillows. The scratchy hospital blanket was warm where it pressed against her knees, cool where it didn't. The window framed a sliver of Columbus sky, washed pale as paper. Somewhere down the hall, a cart squeaked. Somewhere close, somebody laughed too, loud and then hushed themselves. Recovery, the nurse had called it. Ruth called it waiting with purpose. Nora slipped in like a shadow cast by the door, hoodie sleeves pushed to her elbows, her hair pulled into the kind of messy knot that meant she'd rushed over. She dragged the visitor's chair closer with her sneaker. Her eyes always told the truth first. Today they were bright with anger and something like shame. "I didn't want to upset you," Nora started, and the apology in it told Ruth that whatever followed would upset her anyway. "Tell me," Ruth said, mild as tea. Nora flicked her phone awake, thumbs moving quickly. "Dad listed your Corolla on Marketplace under his account. Photos of it in your driveway. He says, clean title. He's answering messages like he owns it." The beeping kept time. Ruth breathed once, twice. She pictured the little gray Toyota, the coffee stain under the cup holder from 2016 she'd never quite gotten out. The dent by the rear bumper Mark had promised to fix, and never did. She put a palm over her own sternum to feel the thump of her heart beneath the flimsy hospital gown. It was still hers. "Screenshots," she said. Her voice did not shake. "Save everything. The listing, the messages. Make sure the date and time show." Nora's shoulders eased a fraction as if she'd been bracing for a storm and gotten instructions instead. "I already started. People are asking if they can come see it this afternoon." He told one guy, "You're incapacitated." The last word tasted bitter. Ruth let her eyes drift to the window again. A squirrel scissored across a branch in the parking lot, maple like it knew the exact weight that would hold. "He's impatient," she murmured. "Impatience makes people sloppy." Nora's lips quirked despite everything. "You always say that because it's always true." Her phone buzzed on the tray table, the old ringtone chirping like a toy bird. "Trish." The name rang against Ruth's ribs like a spoon on crystal. She clicked accept, the angle of her mouth neutral. "Hi, Mom." Trish's voice was sugar-frosted, bright enough to squint at. "We are just checking on you. How are you feeling? Mark wanted to call, but he's been so swamped with selling my car." Ruth suggested pleasantly. A beat of silence, then a laugh to light. "Oh, that. Well, it just seemed practical since you won't be driving for a while. We thought we'd take that burden off your hands. And we might already have a buyer lined up. $4,200 in cash. Isn't that great?" "Practical," Ruth echoed. She could see Trish even without the camera. Perfect hair, perfect nails, tapping the phone. That look she got when she thought she was winning something. "Who has the title?" "Trish." More lightness, now stretched thin. "We'll sort all that out. No problem. Honestly, we're just trying to help." "Of course," Ruth said, and tapped end with her thumb. "Grandma," Nora began. Ruth held up a hand, but not to stop her, to feel how strong it was. "It's fine." She reached for the plastic cup with the straw and took a sip that tasted like the inside of a garden hose. "It's information. Information is never bad." The door nudged open again, this time with an elbow navigating a bouquet so big it knocked the wall. "If these don't get me kicked out, nothing will," Lena announced, setting the flowers down beside the heart monitor. The scent of lilies and grocery store greenery overpowered the antiseptic at once, lush and ridiculous. She planted a kiss on the air near Ruth's forehead and took in with one keen glance the tight line of Ruth's jaw. "What did he do?" Lena asked. No preamble, because the women in Ruth's life had been curated to a standard. "Listed my car," Ruth said. Oh, he did not. He did, Nora said, already turning the phone so Lena could see, scrolling through the photos, the caption, the comments, a small chorus of strangers with opinions. Someone had messaged, "Is the owner available to sign?" Mark had replied, "I'm the owner." Bold, Lena aloud, and stupid. "That car is in your name only, honey. He can list a battleship for all I care. He can't sell it." A laugh, unexpected, curled in Ruth's chest and then leaked out, soft and rusty. "I told Nora the same thing. People are sloppy when they're impatient. They're sloppy when they're greedy," Lena corrected, and her eyes, blue and sharp as lake ice, came back to Ruth's. "What do you want to do?" Ruth eased herself a little higher on the pillows. Her incision tugged, a bright stitch of pain that reminded her of the work her body was doing without any of them. Trish's voice still rang faintly in her ear. 4,200 cash. As if Ruth were a charity drive with a thermometer in front of a hardware store. "I want to make sure every single thing he tries is documented," she said. "And I want him to understand that lines go both ways." Nora glanced toward the hall where a nurse's shoe squeaked past like punctuation. "Dad's going to be mad. Really mad." "He'll be loud," Ruth corrected gently. "There's a difference." The phone buzzed again, as if on cue. A new notification. "Mark, can you sign a few papers for DMV? We'll bring them by later." "Trish, it would be so helpful if you don't make this difficult." Nora sucked in a breath. Lena made a noise in her throat that meant she had a list of words she wouldn't say in a hospital. Ruth smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Tell him I'm resting," she said to Nora. "Tell him we'll speak when I'm discharged." "Okay," Nora said, fingers moving. "And save that," Lena added. "Every text will need a folder." "You always think in folders," Ruth teased. "That's why you keep me around." Lena rested her hand briefly over Ruth's, the squeeze small and fierce. "You're not alone in this." From the hall came the quick staccato of heels. Trish's shoes. Ruth would have bet on it. The door swung inward without a knock. Trish's smile arrived first, bright and brittle, like something purchased on sale. "We came to check on you," she trilled, as if the phone call had been a dream. Mark lurked behind her, hands shoved into his pockets, gaze snagged on anything that wasn't his mother. Lena stood up slow with the unhurried confidence of a woman who knew every square foot of county offices and how to navigate them. Nora's shoulders squared. The monitor kept time. "We just want to help, Mom," Trish said, adjusting the flowers she hadn't brought. "It's silly to let that car sit." Ruth's eyes settled on her son. He wouldn't meet them. He'd grown into his father's height and none of his steadiness. "You listed my car without asking," she said, conversational, as if discussing the weather. "That's not help." Mark's jaw worked. "It's a car, Mom. We need the money. There are bills, and the market's good right now. It's all family." "That's one word for it," Ruth said. Trish tucked a strand of hair behind her ear that was already perfectly placed. "We already have a buyer lined up," she said, glancing at Nora's phone as if that changed reality. "It'll be easier if you just sign where we tell you." Something very calm settled into Ruth then, a lake under a windless sky. She felt the edges of herself sharpen. She looked past Trish to Lena, who lifted an eyebrow. She looked to Nora, whose chin was lifted in a way Ruth recognized from 100 childhood battles over bedtime and borrowed jackets. Ruth smoothed the blanket over her knees, felt its rough weave against her palms. When she spoke, her voice was almost gentle. "They've started a game they don't understand." The room smelled faintly of lilies from Lena's bouquet, but Ruth could still taste the metallic afterbite of Trish's visit. She watched the door swing shut behind her son and his wife, felt the air settle again, heavier somehow. Lena was still, standing arms folded, her gaze sharp as a seam ripper. "Do me a favor," Ruth said, voice quiet enough that it didn't carry into the hallway. "Pull the title for the Corolla." Lena didn't even blink. "From the BMV, from wherever you can get it fastest." Ruth adjusted her blanket as if it mattered, as if it could hide the surgical stiffness in her midsection. "I want paper in my hands that says exactly whose name is on it." Lena's phone was already out, thumbs moving with the speed born of decades, of real estate transactions and the quiet satisfaction of cutting through red tape. "Give me an hour," she said. "Maybe less." Nora sat forward in the chair, her knees pressed together, watching her grandmother like someone trying to memorize a playbook in real time. Dad's gonna flip if he finds out he's already flipping, Ruth cut in. I'm just making sure the deck is stacked before he figures out he's playing the wrong hand. The clock on the wall ticked 5 minutes into silence before Lena's phone chimed. She glanced at the screen, then at Ruth. One eyebrow arched. Your name, only yours, clear as a bell, not even a lean. A slow satisfaction warmed Ruth from the inside out, the kind that didn't show on her face, but hummed in her blood. So he's got nothing but nerve, she said. And nerve doesn't transfer. Ownership, Lena replied, slipping the phone back into her bag. Do you want me to print the record? Yes, and email it to me and to Jerry. Nora looked between them. Jerry, the lawyer. The same, Ruth said. Can you hand me my phone? Her granddaughter placed it in her palm, as carefully as if it were an instrument in surgery. Ruth scrolled through her contacts until she found the familiar name. Jerry answered, on the second ring, his voice warm but brisk, as if he'd already guessed this wasn't a social call. You're still supposed to be recovering, he said. I am, Ruth replied, but I've got a small problem. Mark listed my car for sale. There was a pause. Then, do you have proof of ownership? I will in about 5 minutes, Ruth said, meeting Lena's knowing smirk and screenshots of the listing, messages, everything. Good, Jerry said. She could hear the scratch of his pen, even through the phone. Keep collecting. Don't confront him directly if you can help it. Not yet. You need a clean trail, not an argument. That's the plan. Send me copies of everything. If he tries to move forward, we'll have enough to shut it down without you lifting a finger. Ruth ended the call with a nod that was more for herself than for anyone else. We're documenting, she said aloud, as if committing the word to the air. I can keep an eye out while you're here, Nora offered quickly. Check if anyone shows up for the car. Watch what Dad's posting. You do that, Ruth said. She could see the mixture of worry and resolve on Nora's face, and it made something in her chest soften. If he thinks you're just scrolling, he won't think twice. Lena busied herself tidying the bouquet, pulling out wilted filler greens. What else does he think he can touch? Ruth leaned back against the pillows, eyes half closed, and began ticking through the list in her mind. The car, the joint savings account they'd opened for family emergencies and never used, the tools in the garage, half of them hers, bought when her husband was alive, and then the bigger things, the deed to his house, her name neatly printed, beside his, a fact he'd managed to forget in his scramble for quick cash. Each item was a card in her hand, cards she hadn't played in years, because she'd never needed to until now. By the time Lena returned from the nurse's station with a printed title record, Ruth had the shape of something forming in her mind. Not just defense, but offense. Not just stopping the car sale, but teaching her son a lesson that would be impossible to ignore. She took the document, the weight of the paper somehow heavier than it should have been. Her name, only hers, in black ink, no one could erase without a fight. Outside the window, the late afternoon light had shifted, pooling gold across the parking lot. Somewhere out there, Mark was telling himself the story that she was too old, too tired, too sick to stop him. She smoothed the page flat on the blanket, her fingertips tracing the embossed seal. He's betting I'm weak, she said, almost to herself. That's his first mistake. Ruth kept the title document on her lap long after Lena had perched herself back in the visitor's chair. She let her fingers rest on the paper as though heat might rise from it, as though the ink itself could whisper possibilities. The Corolla was the small thing, the warm-up, the real card, the one she'd never shown, sat tucked away in a dusty file in her desk at home. She hadn't meant to keep it a secret. Not exactly. Back then, Mark and Trish had been all charm and optimism, walking her through the two-story they'd fallen in love with. They couldn't swing the down payment, not without draining every dime they had. And she'd stepped in, because that's what family did. They'd promised it was temporary. They'd promised to pay her back. And in the paperwork shuffle, at the title office, the agent had asked, whose names are going on the deed? Ruth, practical as ever, had said, put mine on it, too. Safer for everyone. They'd nodded, grateful. Trish had even hugged her, and then, over the years, the fact of her name on the deed had faded from their minds like paint left too long in the sun. Ruth hadn't corrected them. Some truths were more useful when forgotten. She lifted her phone again, dialing Jerry before the doubt could whisper that she was pushing too far, too soon. "Ruth," he answered, the warmth in his voice now carrying a thread of curiosity. "I've got a question about co-ownership," she said, skipping the preamble. "Hypothetical, 2 names on a house deed. Both have equal rights, correct?" "Yes," Jerry said slowly, and she could picture him leaning back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. "Unless there's a specific agreement stating otherwise, which I'm assuming there isn't." "There isn't." She heard the click of his keyboard as he pulled up whatever records he could find. "Address?" he asked. She gave it to him. Another pause, then, "Yes, still listed as Konar. No encumbrances beyond the existing mortgage. Full rights intact. You could sell your share tomorrow if you wanted." A small smile worked its way across Ruth's face, slow and deliberate. "Good to know," she murmured. "What are you thinking?" Jerry's tone was measured, but she heard the lawyer underneath it calculating. She didn't answer him directly. Instead, she let the words come out the way she wanted them to be remembered. "If they take what's mine," she said, "I'll take what's ours." Lena's head came up at that, sharp as if she'd just caught the scent of something on the wind. Nora, curled in the chair by the bed, blinked at her grandmother, eyes widening like she'd just realized she was in the middle of a much larger game. "Wait," Nora said, leaning forward. "You mean the house?" "Dad's house. Our house," Ruth corrected softly. "Or at least it is on paper." The idea seemed to hit her granddaughter in layers. First, the legal fact of it, something she clearly hadn't known, then the implication, which made her lips part but left her without words. Finally, the realization that her grandmother wasn't just talking about stopping a car sale. Lena was the first to break the beat of silence. "If you're serious, I can find out what it's worth." Quietly. No MLS, no gossip, just numbers. Ruth shifted against the pillows, feeling the steady ache in her abdomen like a drumbeat that matched her patience. "Do it," she said. "Cash buyers." Only Lena's tone made it clear she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. "Whatever gets us ready," Ruth replied. Nora still hadn't spoken, but her gaze kept darting between them. "Grandma, if you sell, where will they go?" "What will that... Ruth interrupted gently. "Will be their problem to solve. Same as they intended to make my car my problem." Lena was already jotting something in her notepad, the pen strokes crisp. "I'll call in a favor. Won't leave a trail." Ruth's phone buzzed again. Another message, from Mark. This one more insistent than the last. She didn't open it. Not yet. She folded the title record in half and set it aside, one card down, the trump card waiting. Outside, the daylight was slipping toward evening, shadows stretching long across the parking lot. She looked at Lena, at Nora, at the still glowing phone, and for the first time since she'd woken up from surgery, Ruth felt the weight shift, not off her entirely, but into her own hands. "We're not just playing defense anymore," she said, "and when the next move comes, it's going to be one they can't take back." Ruth's voice was steady on the phone, even with the antiseptic hum of the hospital in the background. "Let them come," she told Nora, "but don't get in their way. Just make sure you've got your phone out. Record it." Nora's voice carried that mix of nerves and excitement she'd had since the night they'd talked about the house. "Every word," Ruth said. "You don't have to argue. The truth will speak for itself." By the time the Corolla's potential buyer pulled into the driveway, Nora was leaning against the porch rail, hoodie zipped up, phone in hand. The early evening air in Columbus was still holding on to winter's bite. The sky streaked faintly pink behind the bare branches. The man who stepped out of the silver pickup was mid-50s, ball cap pulled low, the easy gait of someone who'd bought and sold more used cars than he could count. He gave a polite nod toward Nora before Mark emerged from the garage like he'd been waiting for applause. "Here she is," Mark said, sweeping a hand toward the Corolla. "Runs like a dream. Low mileage for the year." The buyer circled it slowly, peering at the tires, the faint dent in the bumper. "You got the title ready?" he asked. "Of course," Mark said quickly. "Just need to fill in the buyer's info." "Easy." Nora's camera caught the whole thing, the casual confidence in her father's voice. The way he kept his hands shoved in his jacket pockets like the deal was already sealed. She stepped down one stair, just enough to be in the conversation without looking like she was picking a fight. "Shouldn't the owner sign the papers?" she asked, her tone mild, almost curious. Mark stiffened. "I am the owner," he said, not looking at her. Nora tilted her head, phone still angled as if she might be checking a text. "Pretty sure Grandma's name is on the title." The buyer's eyes shifted between them, the kind of look that measured risk before price. "You said it's yours," he said slowly. "It is," Mark snapped, a little too loud now. "Family car. It's all the same." "Not legally, it's not," Nora murmured, letting the words hang there just long enough. The man stepped back from the Corolla, his hands sliding into his own coat pockets. "Think I'll pass," he said, giving Mark a tight smile before heading for his truck. "Good luck with it." The slam of the driver's door was punctuated by the slow crunch of tires over the gravel. Mark stood frozen for a beat, watching his Easy Cash drive away before he spun toward Nora. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. Nora shrugged, still holding the phone. "I just asked a question." "You scared him off." His face was red now, the kind of red that traveled up from his collar when he was losing control. "You think you're clever, but you're just ... The screen door creaked, and Trish appeared on the porch, arms folded tight across her chest. "We had a sale lined up," she said, her voice a sharp whisper like she didn't want the neighbors to hear. "Do you know how hard it is to find someone with cash ready? Maybe it's harder when you're selling something that isn't yours." Nora shot back. Trish's eyes narrowed to slits. "You just cost this family easy money. And for what? To play Grandma's little games?" Nora didn't flinch. "If she's playing a game, at least she's playing fair." Mark took a step closer, his shadow falling across her. "Stay out of things you don't understand." Nora met his glare without looking away. The faint blue glow from her phone screen reflected in her eyes. "I understand enough." Behind her, the wind rattled the porch railing, carrying the sound of the pickup's engine fading into the neighborhood. It was the sound of money slipping away, of a plan falling apart. Mark jabbed a finger toward her phone. "Delete whatever you just filmed." She didn't move. Trish's voice was low now, almost a hiss. "This isn't over." Nora's pulse thudded in her ears, but she didn't step back. She'd send the video to Ruth the minute she was alone, and she knew, even before she hit send, that it would be the first real shot fired. The morning Ruth was discharged, the hospital air felt different, less like a place for healing, more like a place she was escaping from. She sat on the edge of the bed in her own clothes at last, the crisp discharge papers folded in her handbag. Through the open doorway, she spotted Jerry's familiar silhouette in the hall, tall, neat, coat pressed, like he'd walked straight out of a courtroom. "Ready?" he asked, stepping in with a smile that wasn't just polite. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting to move a piece on the board. "More than ready," Ruth said, her voice low but sure. He carried her overnight bag himself, ignoring the nurse's offer to help, and steered her toward the elevator. Outside, his car was parked in the physician's space like he owned the lot. They didn't head toward her house. Ruth didn't ask why. When Jerry turned into the parking lot of his downtown office, she simply adjusted the seatbelt across her chest and let the decision settle between them. Inside, the familiar scent of leather-bound case files and polished wood met her like an old friend. The office was quiet. The receptionist had been sent home early, no witnesses to what they were about to set in motion. Jerry guided her into the conference room, where a neat stack of folders sat beside a steaming mug of coffee. He slid one folder across the table, the weight of it more than just paper. "This," he said, "is everything you need to initiate a sale as a co-owner. It's cleaner than you might think. You don't need their permission. You only need to follow procedure." Ruth opened the folder. Words and lines and legal phrasing stared back at her, the black ink crisp against the white paper. "And once it starts, Jerry said, it's public record. And once the for sale sign goes up, there's no undoing it without you." Lena's heels clicked against the polished floor as she entered without knocking, a manila envelope in her hand. "Market research," she said, dropping it on the table. "Your half alone is worth more than they've seen in their accounts in years. I've got a trusted agent, quiet operator, no chatter in the wrong circles." She'll have buyers before the sign even plants. Ruth didn't hesitate. She reached for the pen. Jerry slid toward her, the cool barrel resting against her fingers. Her signature moved in deliberate strokes, steady despite the tug in her abdomen. The scratch of pen on paper was the sound of something shifting, not just in the room, but in the order of her life. When she finished, she set the pen down carefully, lining it parallel to the folder's edge. "How soon?" she asked. Lena and Jerry exchanged a glance. Jerry's voice was calm, precise. "If we file today, we can have the listing live in 48 hours, maybe less." Ruth looked out the window at the thin strip of Columbus sky, blue and cold. She thought of Nora's video, of Mark's face when the buyer pulled away, of Trish's hissed warning. She thought of the house. Their house sitting there as if it were untouchable. "Not in 48 hours, she said, turning back to them. "Today," Jerry's brow lifted. Today, she repeated. "If they want to sell something that isn't theirs while I'm still in a hospital gown, then I'll sell something that is mine the minute I walk out the door." Lena's mouth curved into a grin that didn't bother to hide its satisfaction. "I'll make the call." By the time Ruth stepped back into the crisp air outside, her discharge papers weren't the only thing in her bag. The first steps toward selling Mark's house were already in motion. She settled into Jerry's car, the seat warmer humming beneath her, and clasped her hands in her lap. For the first time in weeks, the weight pressing down on her wasn't weakness, it was momentum. As they pulled into traffic, the city opening up ahead, Ruth thought of the moment the for sale sign would appear on her son's manicured lawn. The image made her smile. And in that private smile was the first crack in the roof over Mark Callahan's head. Mark's neighborhood was the kind that tried hard to look effortless. Driveways power-washed within an inch of their lives, porch lights that all matched, lawns cut to regulation length. Ruth stepped out of Jerry's car at the curb and let the February cold nip at her cheeks before climbing the front steps. The door swung open before she could knock. Trish stood there in a cream sweater and pearl earrings, her smile just a fraction. "Too quick, you made it. We were worried you'd be too tired after everything." Ruth smiled warmly, stepping inside. "Wouldn't miss it." She let her gaze wander deliberately over the foyer, the gleaming hardwood, the way the chandelier light caught on the picture frames. "This place really is beautiful," she said, her voice tinged with admiration. Mark emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Still the same house, Mom," he said, though his eyes flickered toward her like he was trying to gauge her mood. "Some houses hold up better than others," Ruth replied, walking slowly into the dining room. "And in a neighborhood like this, hard to beat." They sat, Nora directly across from her grandmother. The roast on the table smelled rich, the kind of meal meant to suggest abundance. Ruth made sure to compliment the cutlery, the new curtains, even the way the evening light caught the front windows. Halfway through the meal, Trish dabbed at her mouth with a napkin and leaned forward. "Speaking of beautiful things," she began lightly, "Mark and I were thinking, it might be easier for everyone if you just signed the Corolla over to us. Clean, simple. We could even consider it a gift." Ruth's fork paused mid-air, but only for a breath. She set it down with care, folding her napkin over her lap. "A gift," she echoed, tone pleasant. "Just makes sense," Trish said, smiling in that way that pretended there was no pressure at all. "We'd take care of the paperwork, of course." Ruth leaned back slightly. "I was just remembering," she said, her gaze drifting toward Nora. "That summer we drove up to Michigan, the three of us. You must have been 7. Nora's lips twitched into a smile. "When the air conditioning died halfway and we had to eat popsicles for lunch to keep cool." "That's the one," Ruth said. "And your grandfather swore he could fix it with duct tape and a screwdriver." Trish's smile faltered just enough to be noticeable. "Well, or when your father tried to camp by the lake, but forgot the tent poles. We slept in the car that night and woke up to the sound of ducks." Mark made a noise that might have been a laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. Nora glanced between them, the barest glint of amusement in her gaze, a silent acknowledgement that her grandmother was steering the conversation exactly where she wanted it. The rest of dinner passed in a rhythm Ruth controlled. Small talk about old neighbors, the weather, Nora's upcoming exams. Each time Trish angled toward the subject of the car, Ruth sidestepped it neatly, as if the topic were too unremarkable to hold her attention. When the plates were cleared, Ruth pushed her chair back with a smile. I should get going. Still on doctor's orders to rest. You sure you don't want coffee? Mark asked a little too quickly. Not tonight. She reached for her coat, slipping one arm into the sleeve. Nora rose too, following her to the door. Out in the cold, Ruth squeezed her granddaughter's hand just once, quick enough to pass for a goodbye gesture. Nora's eyes met hers, full of questions she didn't ask. From inside, Trish's voice carried, faintly, sharp now that she thought Ruth was out of earshot. She's stalling. Mark, I can feel it. Ruth turned toward Jerry's waiting car, the night air crisp in her lungs, and smiled to herself. The stalling, she knew, would be over soon enough. Ruth was halfway through folding a fresh load of laundry when her phone lit up with Mark's name. The vibration rattled against the kitchen counter like it was warning her to brace. She let it buzz twice before answering. Hello, Mark. His voice was already ragged, pitched high with fury. You put my house up for sale. Are you out of your mind? Our house, Ruth said evenly, picking up a towel to fold. And yes, it's listed. I need liquidity for medical expenses. You don't need, he broke off with a sharp breath, like he was trying to swallow his own outrage and failing. This is betrayal, Mom. Pure and simple. You don't do this to your own son. She stacked the folded towel on the counter. You listed my car without asking me. I'm just following your example. There was a burst of static from the other end. Then Trish's voice cut in, tight, sharp, unmistakable. You can't actually think this will hold up. We'll lawyer up if we have to. I already have a lawyer, Ruth said, walking toward the window. Outside, the afternoon sun caught the neighbor's wind chimes, throwing little sparks of light across her kitchen floor. Then, you better get a better one, Trish snapped, because we're not letting you bulldoze us out of our home. A new voice joined, the line, steady and unhurried. This is Jerry Price, he said, and Ruth could almost hear Trish freeze. Mrs. Callahan is within her full legal rights as co-owner. The listing is valid. The sale will proceed. Mark's voice came back lower, but no, calmer. You're going to regret this. I doubt it, Jerry said. And I'd suggest you don't threaten my client again. That rarely works out well for the other party. The line went silent for a beat, then disconnected. Ruth set the phone down, feeling the tension leave her shoulders one vertebra at a time. Lena's voice came through next, crisp as ever, over speaker. 3 serious inquiries already. 2 cash buyers, 1 willing to close in 30 days. We'll have offers in hand by the weekend. Good, Ruth said. Nora, who'd been perched at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone, set it down. They're not going to just let this happen quietly. No, Ruth agreed, meeting her granddaughter's eyes. They're not. Nora chewed her lip, the worry plain on her face. Then maybe I should stay here for a while, just in case they show up. Ruth thought about the edge in Mark's voice, the way Trish had said, lawyer up, like she was swearing an oath. She thought about the Corolla, the house, and all the little ways her son had mistaken kindness for permission. You can stay, Ruth said finally, but we won't be hiding. Nora nodded, though her shoulders were still tight. Ruth picked up the next towel from the basket, smoothing the corners flat. Outside, the wind chimes swayed again, scattering light across the room. Her phone buzzed once more. This time, a new text from an unknown number. You won't win. She stared at it for a long moment, before showing it to Nora. Save it, Ruth said, and forward it to Jerry. Nora did as she was told, but when she looked back up, there was a question in her eyes. Grandma, how far are you willing to take this? Ruth folded the towel in half, then in half again, setting it neatly on the pile. As far as it needs to go. The text sat on Ruth's kitchen counter in the form of her phone, screen dark now, but the words might as well have been burned into the laminate. You won't win. She didn't hesitate, thumbed Jerry's number. He picked up on the first ring. I take it you've seen the message, he said, voice all business. I have, Ruth replied, and I'm not letting it pass quietly. Good, Jerry said. Screenshot it, then photograph it on the phone, so there's no claim of editing. We'll attach the metadata, send both to me and to Lena for backup. Ruth pulled the phone, closer, took each photo with deliberate precision. Then what? Report it, he said. This is harassment. The police probably won't drag anyone into cuffs, but they'll log it. That's a paper trail we might need. An hour later, a uniformed officer stood in her entryway, pen moving over a small pad. He was young, couldn't have been more than 25, but his eyes were serious when he asked, "Do you have any idea who sent it?" "I could guess," Ruth said evenly. "But I'll let you draw your own conclusions." She slid the phone across the table, the message glowing against the dim light of the room. The officer wrote down the number, promised to file the report, and left with the clipped politeness of someone who knew a storm when he saw it forming. No sooner had the door clicked shut than Lena's voice came through the landline speaker. "Ruth, you need to keep your movements quiet for the next few days. No public runs to the grocery store, no casual drop-ins. If they're willing to send you that, they're willing to try something louder." "I'm not hiding in my own home," Ruth said, standing at the window. Outside, the late afternoon light was already fading into the kind of darkness that settled fast in February. "I'm not saying hide," Lena countered. "I'm saying don't give them easy access. We're too close to offers to risk any mess that could scare a buyer." That night, Ruth brewed tea and sat with Nora in the living room, the muted glow of a lamp their only light. They were halfway through an old movie when Nora's posture changed, shoulders stiff, gaze angled toward the window. "Grandma," she whispered, "that's Trisha's car." Ruth moved to the edge of the curtain, careful not to disturb it. Sure enough, the sleek black SUV was parked across the street. No lights on inside, just sitting there. "She's been there at least 15 minutes, Nora added. "I saw it earlier. I thought maybe I imagined it." Ruth sipped her tea, the steam curling past her cheek. "If she wants to watch, let her watch. Should we call the police?" Nora's voice was tight, caught between fear and indignation. "Not unless she steps on my lawn," Ruth said. "That'll be worth the call." They left the lights low until sometime past midnight, when the SUV's engine growled to life and it rolled slowly down the street. Nora exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. By morning, Lena had news. 2 solid offers, she said over the phone. "One's cash, willing to waive inspection if it speeds the process. The other's just shy of full asking. Conventional financing, but strong credit." Ruth leaned back in her chair, the corner of her mouth lifting. "Send them to Jerry. Let's get the paperwork moving." "You sure? Positive?" Later that afternoon, while Nora studied at the kitchen table, Ruth sat with a stack of printed emails, buyer interest, agent updates, Jerry's formal notices. Each page was another inch in the wall she was building between herself and her son's entitlement. The doorbell rang. Ruth and Nora looked at each other. Neither moved right away. Then, with deliberate calm, Ruth rose and crossed the hall. Through the glass, a shadow shifted on the porch, a figure standing just far enough back to keep their face in darkness. The figure on the porch turned without knocking, melting back into the winter shadows. Ruth didn't open the door. She simply watched until the street swallowed them whole. By morning, Jerry had moved from phone calls to action. "We're not leaving the back door open," he told her over speaker. The sound of a printer worry faintly. In the background, "I'm filing a block at the county recorder's office today. They won't be able to take out a mortgage or a line of credit without your signature." "Do it," Ruth said, pouring herself coffee. "And make sure the paperwork leaves no room for creative interpretation." 2 days later, the phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a loan officer from Mark's bank. "We had a mortgage request come through," she said, "but we can't move forward without both owners' consent. Your name is still on the deed, so consider this my formal refusal." Ruth interrupted, her voice polite but flat. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to confirm her suspicion. Mark hadn't told the bank about her. That evening, the storm broke in another direction. Nora called from her father's driveway, voice tight. "He's furious. Grandma says you're ruining his life. He said things about you I don't want to repeat." "You don't have to repeat them," Ruth said. "Come here." "I don't think I can stay here tonight," Nora admitted, voice cracking just slightly. "Then don't," Ruth said. "Pack what you need. I'll wait up." By the time Nora arrived, her cheeks were pink from the cold, her bag slung over one shoulder. Ruth didn't ask for details, just set an extra blanket at the foot of the bed and made hot cocoa while Nora showered. The next morning, Lena called with the kind of satisfaction you could hear even through the static. "Our top buyer's still in, all cash, no contingencies. If you want it, we can have the contract ready by the weekend." "I want it," Ruth said. "Send it to Jerry." When the papers arrived, she sat at the kitchen table with a pen resting between her fingers. Outside, the wind tossed the bare branches against the window like impatient knocks. Nora sat across from her, working through homework, the smell of toast and coffee in the air. Ruth flipped to the signature page, reading every line twice. "If I sign this," she said quietly, "there's no going back. Do you want to?" Nora asked. "No," Ruth said. "That's the point." She signed with the same deliberate hand she'd used in Jerry's office, the letters steady, unhurried. Then she set the pen down, leaning back in her chair. Jerry's voice came through her phone minutes later. "It's done. You've just taken away their last play. Without a mortgage, without leverage, they have no choice but to see the sale through." Ruth closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Mark had tried to use the house as a lifeline for his own debts. Now it was the rope tightening around his schemes. Nora was watching her, cautious. "What happens now?" "Now," Ruth said, "we wait for them to realize there's nothing left to bargain with." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A new message from Mark. Just 2 words. "You win." She read it twice, then slid the phone aside without replying. The game, after all, wasn't over yet. The meeting was Mark's idea, though he called it a sit-down. Like they were settling some business dispute instead of cleaning up his mess. They'd chosen a corner booth at a diner halfway between their houses, the kind with Formica tables and cracked red vinyl seats. Ruth arrived 5 minutes early, Nora at her side, and ordered black coffee without waiting for the others. Mark and Trish slid in opposite them, both bundled in coats, despite the heat humming from the wall vent. Mark's jaw was tight, the way it got when he'd already rehearsed his lines. "You need to call off the sale," he said before the waitress even dropped menus on the table. Ruth stirred her coffee slowly. "I don't. This is our home," Trish said, her voice pitched just high enough to draw a glance from a nearby booth. "You're tearing the family apart." Ruth set her spoon down with deliberate care. "You sent me a message that read, 'You won't win.'" She let the words hang in the stale air. "Neither of you denied it then. Do you want to now?" Mark looked away, toward the window, streaked with road salt. Trish shifted in her seat but didn't speak. "That's what I thought," Ruth said. She took a sip of coffee, the heat settling in her chest. "Mom, we were upset." Mark tried, "but this is permanent. Once the house is gone, it's gone. You don't come back from that." "I'm aware," Ruth said. "That's why I'm not stopping." Trish leaned forward, her nails clicking against the tabletop. "You could still make this right. Keep the family together. Think about Nora." "Don't use me like that," Nora cut in, her voice sharper than Ruth had ever heard it. Trish blinked, startled. "Honey, no," Nora said. "You tried to sell Grandma's car behind her back. You threatened her. And you think I'm going to side with you because you're my parents. I'm not." Mark's mouth tightened into a thin line. "You don't understand the pressure we're under." "I understand enough," Nora said, matching his stare. The waitress came by asking if anyone wanted pie, and the moment fractured. Ruth set a 20 on the table and slid out of the booth. "I have business calls to make," she said. "Mom," Mark started, but she was already walking toward the door, the bell above it giving a sharp little jingle as she stepped into the cold. Jerry was waiting in her car, engine running. He didn't ask how the meeting went, just held out a folder. "Buyers ready to sign. All cash, closing in 2 weeks if we move now." Ruth opened the folder and scanned the final offer. "Do it," she said, passing it back. "Consider it done." Jerry replied. He was already pulling his phone from his coat pocket as she settled into the seat. By the time they reached Lena's office, she was on the phone with the escrow company, her heels clicking in, a brisk rhythm across the tile. "We've got the date," she said, covering the receiver. "Closing is set. Once the funds hit, it's over." Ruth allowed herself one slow breath, not of relief, but of certainty. This wasn't a battle she was going to win someday. It was one she was winning now. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A new message. She glanced down, expecting another burst of anger from Mark. Instead, it was a photo, her front porch taken at night. No caption. Mark's first move came 2 days after the closing date was set. Lena called Ruth mid-morning, her voice carrying the kind of clipped patience she usually reserved for slow-witted county clerks. "Your son is trying to scare off the buyer," she said. "Told them the roof leaks and the basement floods every spring." Ruth poured herself coffee. "Does it?" "No," Lena said flatly. "The buyers already had a full inspection. They called me directly, said they're not backing out." A pause. Then they actually sounded amused. "Good," Ruth said. "Let him waste his breath." But Mark wasn't the only one making noise. That afternoon, Lena phoned again, this time with a note of disbelief. "You won't believe who cornered me at the grocery store. I was picking up coffee, minding my own business, and there's Trish, blocking the aisle between the flour and the sugar, practically spitting. What did she want? To tell me I'm a vulture. Said I'm destroying a stable family home, and that I should be ashamed of myself." Lena gave a humorless laugh. "I told her I've seen unstable homes dressed up prettier than hers, and that the sale's already moving faster than she can blink." Ruth could picture it. Lena in her dark coat and boots. Trish clutching her overpriced tote bag like a shield. "Thank you," Ruth said simply. That evening, Ruth wrote a check from her trust account. Not a huge sum, but enough to make a point and a difference. She mailed it to the community fund that kept the local library open late for kids who needed somewhere safe to be after school. She didn't tell anyone, not even Nora. Some victories were sweeter, kept quiet. Nora, meanwhile, had taken to sitting with Ruth in the evenings. Legal pads spread across the coffee table. "We should make a list," she said one night, chewing the end of a pen. "Everything you want to do after the sale. Travel, new place, maybe a better car." Ruth smiled. One step at a time. Still, she let Nora scribble down possibilities. A lakeside condo, a new porch swing, maybe a scholarship fund in her name. Watching her granddaughter's face light up as she talked was a reminder that this fight wasn't just about taking something from Mark, it was about building something else entirely. By the end of the week, Jerry confirmed all contingencies were cleared. The buyer was locked in. All that remained was Mark's signature, which the law would force out of him if necessary. Ruth decided to call him anyway. The first time it went to voicemail, she left nothing but her name. The second time, it rang until it cut off. The third, the line went straight to number unavailable. She set the phone down on the counter, not frustrated so much as certain. Silence, after all, was its own kind of admission. That night, while Nora was in the kitchen making tea, Ruth stood by the window, watching the street. Snow had started to fall, soft, harmless-looking flakes drifting under the yellow glow of the street lamp. Her phone buzzed on the sill beside her. No caller ID. She let it ring once before answering. A voice she didn't recognize, low and measured, said, "You should rethink this before it's too late." Then the line went dead. The title office sat on the second floor of a low brick building, its wide glass windows letting in the pale winter light. The air inside carried the faint scent of copier toner and the colder, sharper note of snow melting from people's coats. Ruth walked between Jerry and Lena, her boots making a muted, steady sound against the polished tile, each step deliberate. The receptionist greeted them with a professional smile and directed them toward a glass-walled conference room at the end of the hallway. Through the pane, Ruth saw Mark and Trish already seated. They were side by side, but their bodies leaned away from one another as if even proximity was too much. Mark's shoulders were drawn in tight, his expression a mask carved from something unyielding. Trish's eyes flicked toward the door when she noticed Ruth, her perfectly manicured nails drumming an even measured rhythm against the tabletop, each tap sounding like its own tiny act of defiance. Jerry opened the door, stepping aside for Ruth. She entered slowly, taking in the space, the long table, the neat stacks of paper, the pens lined up like tools for some precise, irreversible procedure. The escrow officer, a woman in a charcoal blazer whose calm demeanor had the weight of long experience, gave them a nod and began organizing the documents in front of her. "We'll start with the deed transfer," she said, sliding the first set. of pages across the table. Her tone was even, unhurried, the kind of cadence that kept emotion from seeping into business. Signatures here and here for both owners. Buyer's agent will execute their portion afterward. Mark picked up his pen and signed quickly, his hand moving in short, hard strokes. He did not look up, not at Ruth, not at anyone, his jaw tightening with each mark he made. When it was her turn, Ruth rested her hand briefly on the paper, smoothing it before she began to write. Her signature came in deliberate curves, the letters steady and unbroken, her pen gliding with quiet certainty. She slid the page back across the table without looking at her son. Form after form followed. The settlement statement, notarized declarations, tax documents, affidavit, each one another step in closing the door that Mark had assumed would always stay open. Lena sat quietly beside Ruth, occasionally glancing at her phone to check for updates from the buyer's agent, her presence as steady and sharp as the scent of her perfume. When the final document was signed, the escrow officer gathered the papers into an organized stack, clipped them together, and set them aside. "That completes the execution of all required documents," she said. "I'll authorize the wire transfer to your trust account immediately. Funds should be available within the hour." The air in the room shifted slightly at those words. Ruth felt it. Not relief exactly, but the solid click of something locking into place. The choice was no longer theoretical. The house was sold. Mark pushed back his chair with a scrape against the floor and stood abruptly. He didn't offer so much as a glance in Ruth's direction as he pulled on his coat and strode toward the door. The glass pane swung shut behind him, rattling faintly. In its frame, Trish remained seated for a moment longer. When she rose, she leaned slightly toward Ruth, her voice pitched low enough for only her to hear. "Hope you enjoy dying alone," she murmured, each word dripping with a bitter satisfaction that sounded practiced. Ruth met her gaze without flinching. "Alone," she replied evenly, "is better than surrounded by thieves." Trish's lips pressed into a thin line before she turned and left, her heels striking the tile with sharp, echoing clicks that followed her down the hallway. Outside, the air was bright and brittle, sunlight glinting off the thin crust of snow that clung to the sidewalk's edges. Jerry walked on Ruth's right and Lena on her left, the three of them moving together toward the car as though their pace was dictated by the weight of the moment. As they reached the curb, Ruth's phone buzzed, in her coat pocket. She already knew what it was before she even pulled it free. A notification from the bank confirming the wire transfer had cleared. The sale was not pending, not promised. It was complete. Yet, when she settled into the passenger seat and looked across the street, her eyes caught on a dark sedan, idling just beyond the glare of the sun. Its windows were tinted, the engine running, and it did not move as they pulled away. It simply sat there watching. The condo was nothing like Mark's house. No polished foyer meant to impress visitors. No manicured lawn signaling how well the owner kept up appearances. It sat at the end of a narrow road that wound along the edge of the lake, its cedar siding weathered to a soft gray, its porch lined with simple Adirondack chairs. The kind of place where you could watch the sun rise over the water without hearing a single other voice for miles. Ruth stepped inside first, her boots clicking against hardwood that carried a faint scent of lemon oil. The air was cooler than she liked, but the light, wide and open through the big front windows, was exactly right. It took her less than 5 minutes to decide. "No mortgage," she told the realtor. "I'll wire the funds in full." The paperwork moved faster than she'd imagined. Within 2 weeks, the keys were hers, tucked in the same leather wallet that now held the bank card for her newly fortified trust account. Jerry had overseen every clause, every signature, making sure no one, least of all Mark, could ever touch what she now owned outright. The next purchase was smaller, but just as deliberate. She and Lena took Nora to the dealership under the pretense of just looking, wandering rows of gleaming vehicles while salesmen circled at a polite distance. When they reached the deep blue hatchback Ruth had picked out in advance, she stopped. "What do you think?" she asked Nora. "It's nice," Nora said, running her hand along the smooth curve of the hood. "Too nice for me." Ruth handed her the keys. "Graduation's in 3 months. Call it an early gift." Nora blinked at her, then at the keys, her voice catching. "Grandma, you're serious." I don't buy things I'm not serious about, Ruth said, smiling. The drive back was quiet, Nora still processing, Lena glancing at her in the rear view with a small, knowing grin. At Ruth's kitchen table that evening, Jerry slid the trust paperwork across to her. Every page was exactly as they discussed. Her assets were structured so they couldn't be siphoned, leveraged, or accidentally liquidated by anyone but her. Protected, he said simply, tapping the final page where her signature would go. She signed without hesitation. The pen felt lighter in her hand than it had at the title office. This wasn't severing something. It was building. Later, Lena produced a bottle of champagne from her bag, the foil already peeled back. 2 clean exits, she said, raising her glass once they were all poured. 2 clean exits, Ruth echoed. The bubbles rose and broke against her tongue, light and sharp. She leaned back in her chair, looking past Lena and Jerry toward the kitchen window, where the lake glimmered faintly in the distance. The heaviness she'd been carrying for months, or maybe years, seemed to ease, as though the air around her had more room now. That night, she and Nora sat on the small porch of the condo, wrapped in blankets against the crisp air. The lake shifted quietly in the dark, catching bits of moonlight like scattered coins. Guess you won the bigger prize, Nora said softly. Ruth glanced at her, one corner of her mouth lifting. Which one's that? Your life back, Nora replied. Ruth didn't answer right away. She thought of the condo's clean walls, the car keys in Nora's coat pocket, the trust account that could outlast every argument her son might try to start. She thought of the dark sedan that had watched her outside the title office, and how it hadn't appeared again. Maybe, Ruth said finally, or maybe I just stopped letting anyone else hold it. A loon called somewhere across the water, low and mournful, and Nora pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Inside, Ruth's phone buzzed on the table. She didn't move to check it. Not yet. The lake was still, the air was hers, and the next part, whatever shape it took, would be on her terms. But when she finally stepped inside and glanced at the screen, the name flashing there wasn't Mark. It was someone she hadn't heard from in over 20 years, and they'd left a single message. I heard you're free now. We should talk. The boardroom smelled faintly of fresh coffee and polished oak, the kind of scent that made a room feel both formal and alive. It was Ruth's first meeting as an official board member of the Lakeside Community Fund, and though she dressed simply charcoal sweater, wool slacks, her presence carried a new weight. The long table gleamed under recessed lights, dotted with thick binders and glasses of water set before each seat. Around her, the other members settled in with the comfortable efficiency of people who'd worked together for years. There was easy chatter about grant cycles and budget forecasts, but also an undercurrent of urgency. Plans, she realized, mattered here. They were not just suggestions, but blueprints for change. The chairwoman, a brisk woman named Harriet with silver hair pulled into a low twist, opened the meeting with updates on 3 ongoing projects: the after-school tutoring program, the community garden expansion, and a small business incubator that had just passed its first year. Ruth listened, taking notes on a yellow pad, her pen moving in quiet, steady lines. When Harriet shifted to new business, there was a pause, a moment where several eyes flicked in Ruth's direction. She felt the invitation there, unspoken but clear, and leaned forward slightly. I'd like to propose a youth training initiative, she said. Not just job readiness, but a program that teaches practical skills: trade, apprenticeships, financial literacy, public speaking, something that prepares them not only to find work, but to build lives. One of the younger members nodded immediately. We've talked about that in the past. But the funding, I'll cover the launch costs, Ruth said, her voice even but firm. And I'd like it named after my granddaughter, the Nora Callahan Youth Development Program. There was a ripple of murmured approval around the table, a mix of surprise and admiration. Harriet tilted her head. That's a generous offer. Are you certain you want to commit before seeing the full budget projection? I've already run my own numbers, Ruth replied. It's viable and it matters. From her spot, 2 seats down, Lena offered a small smile. Leave the paperwork to Jerry, she said. He'll make sure every cent is locked in for the right purpose. Jerry, seated on Ruth's right, gave a small nod. I'll draft the pledge agreement this week and ensure the fund is restricted. No one will be able to reallocate it without board approval and your consent." They moved on to other agenda items, grant applications, donor reports, but Ruth felt the quiet satisfaction of something set in motion. Not a transaction, not a counterstrike, but an investment. When the meeting adjourned, people lingered to speak with her, shaking her hand, thanking her for stepping in with such commitment. She accepted their words with measured grace, her thoughts half on the room and half on the lake, waiting outside the tall windows. Lena caught her elbow as they stepped into the corridor. "You know," she said, her tone softer now that they were alone, "you've done more than win. You've built something, something that lasts." Ruth glanced at her, the corner of her mouth lifting. "That's the real revenge," she said. They walked toward the elevator together, the hum of quiet conversation from the meeting room fading behind them. Outside, the air had that crisp clarity that came after a morning frost, the kind that made each breath feel sharper, cleaner. As they reached the street, Jerry's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, then frowned slightly before showing it to Ruth. It was an email from an unfamiliar sender. The subject line reading, "We need to discuss the past before it catches up to you." The wind off the lake stirred the ends of Ruth's scarf, but her expression didn't change. "Forward it to me," she said, stepping toward her car. "I'll decide what's worth answering." The narrow road to the condo curved along the lake like it had been drawn with a slow, patient hand. Ruth drove this time, her fingers light on the wheel. The faint hum of the tires blending with the low rhythm of Nora humming along to the radio. The late afternoon sun was sliding toward gold, spilling through the windshield in warm bands that lit the dashboard. When the cedar-sided condo came into view, Ruth felt the same quiet pull she had the first time she'd seen it. No imposing gates, no decorative stone pillars, just the soft gray siding, the wide porch, and the water stretching out behind it as though the lake itself was an old friend. They pulled into the gravel drive, the hatchback's engine settling into silence. The trunk popped open, and between them they began unloading the paper grocery bags, each one stuffed with a mixture of practical staples and small indulgences: dark chocolate, fresh basil, a bottle of sparkling cider. Nora had insisted on the bags weren't heavy, but they made the walk up the porch steps feel purposeful. Inside, the air still carried a faint scent of cedar from the walls, mingling with the sharper note of coffee from the morning. They set the groceries on the counter, and Nora immediately began unpacking, narrating each item in an exaggerated announcer's voice until Ruth was laughing, her hands braced on the counter to keep steady. "Don't laugh too hard," Nora warned, with mock seriousness. "You might bruise the eggs." Ruth shook her head, still smiling. "I've survived worse than a broken egg." Halfway through unloading, Nora reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp envelope. "Almost forgot," she said, sliding it across the counter. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "Only if you're allergic to good news." She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. At the top, in neat black lettering, was the university's crest. She read the words slowly. "We are pleased to inform you of your acceptance," and felt her chest warm in a way that had nothing to do with the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. When she looked up, Nora's smile was almost shy. "Full ride. They even want me to start in the honors program." Ruth stepped around the counter and pulled her granddaughter into a hug, holding on for a moment longer than she needed to. "You earned every bit of it," she said. By the time the groceries were put away, the sun was settling low enough to turn the lake into a sheet of molten copper. They carried mugs of coffee onto the porch, wrapping their fingers around the warmth. As the air cooled, out on the water, a single fishing boat drifted lazily, its wake cutting a slow V toward the horizon. Ruth settled back in one of the Adirondack chairs, her eyes tracing the edge of the lake. She thought of the hospital bed, of the antiseptic air, the weight of fatigue in her bones, and the quiet resolve that had begun forming there. She thought of the first glimpse of the listing page, her name still on the deed, the shock giving way to a decision that had set everything in motion. She thought, too, of the title office, of Mark's silence, of the weight she'd carried for years, as though it were a permanent fixture in her life. Only now did she realize how much lighter the air felt without it pressing down. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine from the far shore. She took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth move through her. Beside her, Nora leaned back, legs stretched out, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if she were already imagining the roads ahead. For the first time in a long while, Ruth felt no urge to glance over her shoulder, no flicker of unease at what might come next. She was here, and it was hers. She let her eyes rest on the last streaks of gold sinking into the water, and spoke, her voice carrying just enough for Nora to hear. They tried to take my ride. I took their roof and drove into my own horizon.